Welcome everybody to our bite-sized PD about building student self-efficacy in writing. I'm Lesli Morris.
I'm Brianna G.
And Brianna let me into her class in second quarter, and we co-taught together for an entire quarter, well, almost an entire quarter. And we worked on strategies that we read about in research that could build student self-efficacy in writing. This is based on a presentation that we gave at UCTE a few weeks ago. And so we wanted to share everything that we learned with all of you. So this presentation is the original one that we used in UCTE. So you'll see there are places to stop and talk, places where we would have showed videos, but we're going to kind of shrink that all in to just an online presentation. So first, when we think about post-COVID-19, like how has student writing changed? So Brianna was pretty new to teaching. So one thing that I've heard a lot of teachers talk about is student apathy and just kind of a lack of interest in what they were writing. What were some of the other things in our session that teachers mentioned?
Yeah, a lack of independence with their writing, that they needed almost help all the time. That was something that they pointed out. I'm trying to think of other points, but those were the main ones that they've seen. Not capitalizing letters like they used to, maybe some lack of care in how intentional they are with their writing.
Yeah. So our goal with this quarter was to increase student independence and ownership with their writing, and really to create that student self-efficacy. So we actually used this research article that's linked, and you will have access to the slides. And this article presented a framework, and it was meant for seniors. It was meant for the college application essay, but I read it after all of you senior teachers had done your college application essays. So I thought, how could we take this framework and turn it into something that we could use with any writing? So do you want to walk us through the framework?
Yeah, so first you have where you teach a skill lesson to introduce a part of the genre that you're teaching. So how to do an introduction or how to do a conclusion of any sort of genre that you're teaching. For us, we did an op-ed. And then you use models to show what that skill looks like. Then the students practice the skill. Then they share the writing. Then they practice it again in their own writing. And then they get feedback, and then they revise, and then based on whatever they did, whatever their student work looked like, we would read their journals. I used writer's notebooks, and based on their work, we would plan for the next day and change up.
Yeah, so a lot of writing, a lot of practice, and we were continually changing our lesson plans. What was that like for you as a teacher?
It was a little nerve-wracking, to be honest. So I tend to not look at their notebooks all the time. It's just a lot. But when we started doing, I was like, oh, this is instant data. This is instant data on how they're doing. I can make a decision for tomorrow based on this right here. My exit tickets were more intentional. The way I was teaching, I was just evaluating myself a lot more, which made me more vulnerable, but I loved it in the end. It was a bit of an adjustment at the beginning, but not to get overwhelmed with the stack of notebooks in front of you, but I loved it.
Yeah, and I would say they were quick checks, maybe 15 minutes or so that we were looking through them. And generally after about 10 or 15, we got a sense of, oh, we need to change this, we need to reteach this, or look at this amazing writing that they're doing. And we have examples from their notebooks that you'll get to see throughout this. We're going to go kind of quick, and so please check out the presentation and you can zoom in and look at the pictures. So we did do a pre and post survey about self-efficacy, and these were kind of the general topics that come with writing. We were doing an op-ed for the argument unit. So we looked at claim, evidence, elaboration, transitions, connecting to their thesis and counterclaims. But what's kind of the most exciting metric was this one, that they are willing to continue to write even if they're unsure of what to do next. And it went from around 45 to 70% of students felt confident to keep writing. And that's that independence that we were kind of going for. And I don't know, being vulnerable and trying trying to write, trying something new. What other benefits did you see at the end of all of this?
Yeah, so one of them was how well it helped my MLs. So I think on the next slide here, you'll see that I had this one student, and this was my win, was how well he transitioned into writing a full-on op-ed. I mean, his final product was what you see here is like 3 paragraphs, but this is a win because in previous quarters and previous assessments, he was only submitting AI generated responses. And so now we got here in his notebook, he's writing in his native language, thinking his own ideas, and then finding a topic that relates to him personally, and then writing about it and trying out some of the things that we had in class. And so just seeing my MLs go from AI generated response, zero redo to having a whole process and a product at the end was just really wonderful for me.
Yeah, it was really great to see him take those chances. And we saw him writing in English in his notebook every day. But I didn't know until the end that he had been using only AI up to that point. That's a huge win. This is huge for an ML to be able to do this. So we had 3 kind of main strategies that we used. The first one is co-constructing meaning. Second is the model, and then wraparound feedback. So we'll go through each one of these. So co-constructing meaning comes from Vygotsky's work, where he talked about how our development and our learning comes from social interactions that are guided within like our zone of proximal development. And we use that to co-construct knowledge together. So this is how children co-construct meaning with their other partners and other children as they play. So what this looks like is when you have a topic or a really important concept that you need to teach, you're not going to just give the definition. We need to draw on everybody's experience and knowledge to co-construct this meaning together. And it really deepens their learning and understanding of it. So here's kind of the step-by-step process. We did it several times throughout the unit, but one of the times we did it with was, what is a credible source? So we pulled model texts of credible sources, and this is really important. You want to choose really good models that really are excellent. And then students identify characteristics of that model. So we had students brainstorm in their notebook, what makes this a credible source? And they started naturally identifying things like, oh, they're citing from research, or it's from this kind of website, or this was written by a doctor. And then as they kind of gather those, they write a definition. A credible source is, and then they write. Then they partner up into pairs, and they have to combine their thoughts. That's that co-construction to create a new definition. Then they get into teams of 4 and 5 and co-construct again. And then we wrote all the definitions on the board. And as a whole class, we looked at what the definitions had in common, and we co-constructed a definition together. So do you want to talk about what results we saw from that?
Yeah, so the data is interesting here because for my B5, for one of my class periods, I taught the CROP test for determining what is a credible source. And I taught them the acronyms, they took notes in their notebook, and then they were given 2 sources and they had to tell me which one was credible and why. Well, my B7, this is the class that they co-constructed the definition together, and in their notebooks, they wrote their own definition and then our class definition of a credible source. And their explanations were just so much better than my B5. And they more often selected the correct source, which one was more credible than the other. The other one, they kept getting confused because the dates were, this one was more recent, but it was a blog post. And so they were getting all tangled up in the order of the CRAP test. Whereas my B7, they just could tell you, nope, that's not credible by looking at it, looking at the bias of it, and they could give me a better explanation.
Yeah, and I felt like the writing was actually better in B7. You know, I feel like we talk all the time about how students struggle with analysis and explanation. And they got it because they like understood it. So that was really exciting.
Yeah, so our next strategy was model, model, model. So when we say model, 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 we're talking of modeling text, having model text, modeling skills, and then teachers modeling through their writing. Students get to see where they are and where they need to go by looking at other writers and how they use their text. One way I did this was modeling introductions. So if you'll see on the screen, there's a bunch of different mentor texts we looked at. We actually looked at the first paragraph of all of those mentor texts. And then in our notebooks, we analyzed, okay, what techniques was each article doing? So in their notebooks, they would write article 1, article 2, and then article 3. We did one of those together. And so they would write down each of the different techniques, what you could do in an introduction. So then it became just a list of options of ways that you could start off your op-ed instead of one prescribed formulaic, this is how you do an introduction. Instead, it was like, you choose which article are you trying out. So when I would talk to them and look at their introductions and they would practice writing theirs, I'd say, okay, which mentor text are you using? Which model text are you trying to use their style? And then they were like, oh, I'm trying out this style. And I was like, okay, do you think this is the most effective for your topic? And then we would have these good conversations and I loved it.
Yeah. It was really great to see that come in.
Yeah. And so then we did this again with embedded transitions. So we get this I Believe essay by Jackie Robinson. And if you click on that, you can have access to that essay. We listened to the essay, and then as they listened, they would highlight moments where they thought there was a transition, where they thought they were transitioning to a new idea. And then this is where we modeled the skill of doing an embedded transition. So we had a gradual release of responsibility where in class, we would highlight with them and show them, okay, I think right here's an embedded transition. Then they work with their groups and they'd say, okay, I think right here's an embedded transition. And then on their own, they would highlight the rest of the embedded transitions in the text. And then they would go into their own piece and revise their transitions and try out writing an embedded transition.
Yeah. And I think what was really cool about this is we wanted to model like real world writing. And in the real world, we hardly ever see first, second, third, like that kind of formulaic writing that happens. And so we wanted to show them this kind of more complex way of transitioning, which is hard. And it was also, if you go back to the survey, it's one of the things that they felt the least comfortable with when we did our pre-survey.
Yeah. This was one of my favorite lessons that we had. It felt effective. It felt like they were getting it. And I could easily tell in their writing. You can see in the example that when they added it in, it just upped their writing so much. And then I loved some of their reflections at the end of the class. I said, okay, let's reflect a little bit and on how you're feeling about your op-ed. And then after that lesson, the student wrote, I'm feeling a little better about my op-ed. And then they told me what they're least confident about. And I could just see that they were taking ownership of their piece of their work.
Yeah. And in that example, you'll see the first line says transition means to move on to something. That was a co-constructing meaning. And that was the definition that the class came up with. Now, is that a perfect definition of a transition? No, but we saw that they understood the goal of transitions in their writing, which was the ultimate. And then
Only read better than my
I'm
kids.
going to pause this, but I really encourage you to go back and watch this. It's Kelly Gallagher and Penny Kittle talking about writing with your students and modeling for students. And so you can click and see my brainstorm where I wrote in front of students. So as they were writing in their notebooks, I would have this document projected and I was writing. And then we did sort of think alouds with students where I'd say, I don't know if that's right. I need to look this up, or I'm thinking maybe this, or I asked the class for counterclaim. But it was interesting to see for me coming in, not knowing the students. I think the day I did this with them changed my relationship with them in class, because I think they felt like I was with them, like I was a part of it, you know?
Yeah. And that it was fun for me to watch too, to see when Leslie was creating a thesis that she's like, oh, I'm not sure if that's how many years this has been. So she's like highlighting and she's like, oh, I'm going to come back to this. And she's just saying that out loud, just really making it so clear how she thinks as a writer. And when she did that, I was like, oh, I make those same decisions all the time. So then I feel connected to her as a writer. And then my students are not intimidated. They're like, oh, if I don't know this right now, it doesn't have to be perfect right away. And it just made it so that we were all human in the same space together.
Yeah. I think too many kids have this perception that writers, when they write, it comes out perfectly, and it doesn't.
Yeah.
So here are some student samples from them kind of following that same format. We brainstormed, we did a lot of free writing. We did a lot of free writing before they got to their essay. But then you can see in these examples their thesis, their claims, their counterclaim as they're thinking through these examples. Some used bullet points. You can see where some crossed out things, but it was really exciting to see them writing in their notebooks alongside me. So then our third strategy was all about feedback. We know that students grow more when they're getting writing in the middle of drafting, right? We're not waiting until the end to help them. And Kelly Gallagher and Penny Kittle have this to say in 180 days. And this just hits my heart every time I read it. We do our students no favors when we see a piece of writing once, just to grade it. We know how it feels to have our entire year of teaching graded on a single observation, or maybe two 20-minute observations in an IPOP by an administrator. Our students feel the same sense of injustice when the first time they receive detailed feedback on their work is when it's graded. It's too late. Their confidence is torpedoed. And we have so many students that come to us with, I call them writing scars. And that like feedback in the middle is so important. And we really then didn't give a lot of feedback at the end because by the time we read their essays and graded them, I want to say we had read them 5 or 6 times. So they knew.
Which led to this thing, wraparound feedback, where Leslie and I would move from desk to desk and help students figure out what they're doing right, what they could work on. It was nice when there were 2 teachers in the room, but there's not always 2 teachers in the room to do this. So often it would look like me going around one by one and then saying, okay, if I didn't get to you, starting at that spot the next time, and just working from desk to desk. If you want to talk more about wraparound feedback.
Yeah, I mean, it was something that I started and loved, and you got to see work in progress as kids were going. The other key point of wraparound feedback is not for me to come up to your desk, tell you what to do, and as Kelly Gallagher says here, take away your control. So they were student led and not teacher directed. And we do have a typo there. Teach, we'll fix it. So we would always ask, what questions do you have? What are you working on? What are you struggling with? And they would tell us really clearly, oh, I really don't know if this claim fits my thesis, or I don't know how to cite this source. Like that, it could really have been anything. And then we would give suggestions, and often we would ask questions back. And so they were developing, and I think that helped them build their confidence.
Yeah. And I had to be pretty explicit. Like, do not ask me, what grade would you give this?
Yeah.
Do not ask me, is this good? Is this a good essay? Ask me specific things. Ask me things about your transitions. Ask me things about your conclusion. Ask me things about your thesis. And it really did just change the conversation. We were having intellectual writing conversations one-on-one, and then we were working things out together. Like a student was like, do you think this thesis works here? And I'm like, oh yeah, let's look at this. And then I would be like, well, what if we changed it up like this? And he was like, actually, I like it the other way. And so it was like, yeah, I'm like, oh yeah, you're totally right. And so we're just having these really authentic conversations that any writers would when they're drafting.
Yeah. Yeah. It was really great. And before we move on to this, no, let's talk about the end. So then talk about how you did peer feedback.
So another thing, so I wanted to make sure that even if I didn't get to them during that class period, they had a chance to get feedback from another writer. that they were able to talk about their writing and get feedback from them. So I would have them in their notebooks, share, like they would swap. They'd swap notebooks and they would write down feedback to that person about their thesis, about their claims, about their counterclaims, or sometimes they're swapping Chromebooks and giving feedback. And it was pretty structured. It was like, okay, write your claim, swap notebooks, give feedback, swap it back. And everyone was doing this together. And it was wonderful. So if you see some of these examples, the feedback was good. They were like, make the thesis a bit shorter. Don't state the statistical facts in your thesis. Like they were giving feedback that I would have given them as a teacher. And it takes the load off of me to be that person to all of them when they can be that person to each other.
Yeah. So I encourage you to click on or zoom into these, but the one on the left, like the introduction that they ended up with at the end is, make no mistake, this essay is about loyalty. What a strong introduction. Like, boom, there you go. And the student was modeling one of our model texts as well. So
yeah.
So those are our 3 strategies: co-constructing meaning, model, 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 and wraparound feedback. And they're not new strategies. We were just very intentional with following this framework and giving them the practice and then revising our lessons. And I think using each one of those created a lot of empowerment for students. So let's talk about results. So average number of essays turned in from 5th to 7th. 5th, 6 people did not turn it in. 7th, only 1 person. And this was a chronically absent student. And then we only had 1 essay plagiarized. And it was actually the same in both, which is really exciting.
Yeah, I was really happy to see the difference that these strategies made in their writing, especially with this number of essays not turned in. I feel like the end of the quarter, you're just like, oh, where is this? Where is proof? But I
know.
think because they were confident all along the way that they could just get help all along the way, they could get feedback along the way, they weren't scared to turn it in. Or they weren't rushing something at midnight. They had something they've been working on the whole time.
Yeah. And all those positives that we were able to give them and encouragement along the way. And then the average grades from 70 to 84%, which is huge. I mean, that's a solid B compared to a C-, like teetering into the D range, right? So super exciting. What were some of the results you saw aren't grade or number? What benefit did this have in your classroom?
Yeah, it really increased the communication and relationship I had. My B7 class, to this day, I have the most positive relationship with them. When I ask a question, it's not crickets. They talk to me. We will have good discussions, which in an English class, you're like leaning on when you're talking about a book or when you're talking about themes. And so with my 5th period, it's like crickets. And so that relationship building was huge for me, because that's a conversation I feel like a lot of teachers been having. It's like, why is my class so quiet? What can I do when my class is not talking? Then no one's raising their hand, no one's participating, but that participation in B7 just went.
Yeah. And for me, I mean, I'm in the school and I still have students who like say hi to me and, Miss Morris, are you coming to teach today? And I'm like, no, that was just 2nd quarter. And that's really exciting because I miss every day being in a classroom, but that they feel comfortable with me. And so I can't even imagine what that's like with someone that they've known longer and have a stronger relationship with. So that's not data related, but so important.
Yeah.
Okay. What would we change? Oh, every day we ran out of time for end of class reflection. We wish we had done more of that. And at the beginning of the quarter, we were reading Julius Caesar. And so we were trying to force an inauthentic text connection in the writing. And we're going to go through kind of the changes we have on the next slide. And then next year, we want to restructure it and choose a different text, we think.
Yeah, it just wasn't natural to give them. Well, originally we had prompts that were more connected to Julius Caesar, and they just weren't excited. And I wasn't excited to read an op-ed about Julius Caesar.
No,
just didn't fit.
So the original prompt is a more traditional prompt. So choose one of the following quotes to respond to. Do you agree or disagree? Use the text from Julius Caesar and provide sources to support your argument. And then we changed.
Yeah. So then it was way more open. It's still not a perfect prompt, but it was create an op-ed that supports an idea in which you're passionate about. Oh, the freedom was just, it was, the classroom became alive.
Mhm.
As soon as that freedom opened up, the conversations were exciting.
And we did this great activity one
Mhm.
day where they partnered up with a couple different people, like they rotated, and they talked about their topic. And it was so exciting to see other kids who were like, oh, that's so interesting. Or some kids were like, oh, I think I'm going to change my op-ed because they realized like it really could be open to whatever they were interested in.
Yeah. And we didn't give them ideas. It was very much whatever you want. What are you passionate about? And they did a free write at the beginning with just an open-ended question, write about what you're passionate about, something you're passionate about. And I think that really opened up things.
Yeah. And like going back to Diego, our ML student, his topic was how Latinos are mistreated. I mean, that's something that he's incredibly passionate about, something that he experiences. And then he went out and found research, and he cited his research, which was exciting, to support what his own experiences were.
Yeah.
And we did have this bonus points if you effectively tie it back to Julius Caesar because we were trying to show cohesion. But really, we could have just abandoned that.
Yeah, we could have.
That's okay. That's what happens. Jen, and then we'll just ask you, how could you change a prompt to make it more authentic? Because I do think having authentic writing was really key in changing apathy and making them care.
And it was the key for me to find mentor text. I can't find mentor text if it's like only published at a college or if it's only published in your classroom.
Yeah.
Like the mentor text will come as you look online and you see this is how people are writing. This is how people cite their sources in the real world. This is how people transition to ideas in the real world. And that's where this idea to even change it to an authentic writing experience is coming from, because I was having such a hard time finding a mentor text of what I was wanting my students to do. And I'm like, well, that doesn't sound right.
Because we don't write 5-paragraph essays in the real world. Yeah. So some other benefits, we've already talked about a lot of these. We were able to detect plagiarism. We could find mentor texts. We love their topics, and the environment in the room changed. So don't be afraid to be flexible and change your plans, because it's a little scary to try something that you don't know is going to go well, but it's so beneficial. I think the first lesson I taught was a flash debate. And I remember saying to you, this isn't going to go well. Don't intervene, because the goal wasn't the debate. And by the way, it didn't go well. The goal was to help them understand what a good argument is. And it was like an experience that we could keep referring back to throughout the quarter, because they knew what it felt like to not have a good argument.
Yeah. And watching Lesli do that, she like on the spot started brainstorming with them. Oh, what makes a good argument? And I'm like, whoa, that was not in the plan. And for me as a new teacher, I was like, it's okay. It's not in the plan. And that's sometimes when your best teaching happens, is when you just start going with the feeling in the room and start feeling out, okay, let's have this conversation. And it was so fun.
Yeah. Yeah. So be flexible. It's good. So we have some recommended resources, and then you can see our unit plan notes. They're our real notes, so they're not perfect. And that's just great.
And there are links on those notes to different worksheets or different activities we use that you can take at your own pleasure.
Yes. So if you have any questions, please reach out to either me or Brianna, and we can help you out.
Yeah, our emails are on the first page.
Thanks.